For, and I think everyone gets nervous when I say I have to create some context right out of the gate, but we are going to be talking about one of those difficult topics this morning. We're going to be talking about divorce, single-parent families, and blended families, and there's a lot of baggage that I think some people carry around with the way that they've been treated if they've had a divorce or they've been a single parent. And so I also want to say that I don't think the church has a great history of treating people who have gotten divorces overly well. I know some people that have felt completely ostracized by their churches because they have gotten a divorce. And so whether it was here or not, I just ask that you accept my apology as a clergy member in Jesus' church, that you just be healed of that and know that you are welcome and that you are safe here. We are going to talk about some difficult things this morning, and so I just ask that you would have an open mind and an open heart. And again, I would ask that you see this as a way for us to heal and move together, and that you not take shame or feel guilt because of the decisions that have gone on prior to this. So I want us to start out this morning by looking at a story of Jesus. And he's come to a new area. This comes from Matthew 19, and right away the Pharisees begin to test him on marriage. And they say to him, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?" Okay, and now again, immediately I highlighted that last phrase in red because it again speaks to the heart of the Pharisees. And in Jewish culture, the man only was allowed to divorce. It wasn't like today or even in Roman civilization that men and women had the opportunity to go through divorce proceedings. It was literally only initiated by the man in Jewish culture. And so what they're saying is, can we just divorce our wife for any and everything? So if my wife doesn't cook me a good meal, can I get rid of her? If she doesn't have sex with me, can I get rid of her? If she doesn't do the things I want around the house, can I get rid of her? For any single reason. And Jesus replies, "Have you not read that in the beginning the Creator made them male and female? And he said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." Now, as we've talked about in previous weeks, as we looked at the concept of marriage, we know that Jesus is quoting here from Genesis. Now, again, I think this would come as a surprise to the Pharisees because I think they were expecting him to quote from the Torah, to quote from Moses, the fact that men could divorce their wives, but he doesn't. He takes it back even predating Moses and says, you know what? No, this is God's intention for a couple, and they're not to be separated. All right? And so, again, they argue right to that point that, well, didn't Moses say we could divorce? And Jesus replies, you know what? Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. But this was not the way it was from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman commits adultery. And so what we see here is Jesus really balancing the scales. He's gone from this very patriarchal move and assumption that males can, have full control over their wives. And he says, you know what? No, it's not that way. If you're truly following God, you won't divorce unless there are these specific things that happen. Now again, the disciples even are a little surprised by this because they say, well, gosh, if that's really true, it's better not to marry at all. And again, I think that shows the state of even their heart. And Jesus says, you know what, this teaching is tough and not everyone can accept it. So I want that to be kind of the foundational story that we look at in response to how I think the church should view divorce. But I also want us to move on and see how the church is to respond when people get divorced and when families need support through different processes. So in previous weeks, we have looked at some of the components of a strong marriage. And one of the ones that, again, that most sociologists and social scientists look at is this commitment. Okay, this fact that couples are to have this unconditional commitment. And we've linked that with this idea of covenant, of God being in relationship with us. And so man and wife are meant to be in this covenant relationship with each other. And there you see some of the other lists that we have talked about in previous weeks. Now, what happens when some of those components disappear or they're not going as well as we find people come into conflict and they're not able to resolve that conflict. And social scientists have found a few reasons. On the personal level, you have relationship issues. Again, that there's conflict that just is not being resolved. Perhaps one spouse just kind of quits doing his or her part. There's also behavioral problems that maybe perhaps one spouse has this certain set of behaviors that go on and are not healthy for the relationship. And then again, as we've talked in previous weeks, this idea of changing gender values and the fact that, with more and more women working outside of the home, that again, there's a delicate balance that families have to figure out how that's going to work, and they need to be able to agree upon what's best for each other and for their family. Now, from a cultural or more social point of view, I think the normalization of divorce also leads us to be more prone to pursue divorce as a normal means of resolving things, okay? It doesn't take long to look at our glorious celebrities and how they're married one day and 3 days later they're divorced, and we begin to see this as just normal behavior, okay? But again, we see a declining view of unconditional commitment to each other. Social scientists have also found that people who go through divorce don't end up happier for a period of time. Okay, often that's one of the biggest reasons people go divorce. I'm just not happy. And this goes right back to the very words of the Pharisee, well, can I divorce her because my wife doesn't make me happy? But folks, happiness is based solely on circumstances. And oftentimes in marriage, it's very difficult. And there's going to be times that you're unhappy. But if you're committed to that relationship, then you work through those very difficult times to heal and grow closer together. Okay? More liberal divorce laws, again, it's very easy for either spouse to now initiate divorce where it was perhaps not so in the past, and that's where I have the freedom of choice of women, as again, more women have more rights, more opportunities, different financial resources. It's more of an option for them to choose divorce now because they don't need to rely simply on their spouse's income, where before they may have stayed in a marriage because they knew if they were to get divorced, they would have no financial resources. Okay, so those are just a couple of issues of divorce. And again, I bring these up because they're very complex, and I think the church needs to understand them. I don't think it serves our people well to just turn a blind eye to some of these problems and go, well, people who get divorced are just kind of bad people and they should never do that. All right? Because there are friends, there are families, there are brothers and sisters in Christ. Now, people who go through a divorce experience 4 different stages oftentimes. And the first is obviously emotional. Most of us don't go into relationships, especially marriage relationships, thinking that they're going to fail. Okay? Most of the time, there's hurt that's involved in this. There's fear. The fact that, wow, this person I committed my life to, and now this relationship hasn't worked out. There's insecurity. So there's a large number of emotional issues that people who get divorced have to deal with. Then generally the next step is a separation of some sort, followed by more legal arrangements and adaptation, and finally families have to figure out how to restructure and how to restabilize. Sometimes that means that the parent remains single. Other times that means that parents remarry and you create these blended families that we'll talk about in a little bit. But again, each step of the way brings with it its own unique problems and the complexity of this. And again, remembering that most of the time people don't want to go through this. All right? And I think we need to be very empathetic to people's hearts as they go through it. Now, I want to transition just briefly and talk about single-parent homes and remind you that one of the reasons I think God or Jesus takes such a strong stance on divorce and he calls us back to God's intention for marriage is because he understood that when the couple breaks up, that dyad, that powerful husband and wife unit, that it has effects that just kind of ripple across the rest of the family and into the community. And so as couples divorce, we find that approximately 1 million children a year become part of single-parent homes. Okay? 83% tend to live with their mother and their father. And so, folks, we see very negative effects on families and especially on children as a result of divorce. Okay? From the gender perspective, again, I believe in the traditional view of marriage of one man and one woman, and I believe that each gender brings something very special to that relationship, something that that child needs from each gender. And when one of them is not present a majority of the time, it has some very negative impacts on our kids. And so it does. It causes high level of emotional stress and insecurity. We see children act out because they're unsure of what's happening. They're unsure of how to even understand what's going on between mom and dad in these situations. So you see things like acting out, rebellion, you see decline in academic work, and many other areas. Another startling area, I think, when we talk about divorce is that nearly 2/3 of single mothers end up below the poverty line. Okay? And so when we think about that, even though women are now doing better financially and they have more choices, many mothers end up working 2, 3, and 4 jobs trying to take care of their kids, only to find out that they're not really getting to spend any time with their kids because they're working so many jobs, just trying to put a roof over their head and food on the table. Okay, so it leads to issues of time and caring. And so, folks, again, I'm very empathetic to single parents because I've said this probably last week even, that it's hard enough to raise kids with 2 people. I can't imagine doing it by myself. And so, folks, as the church, we need to be very responsive and very supportive of these people who are trying to go alone, because I really believe the vast majority of them are doing the very best that they can with the situation that they have been given. Now I'm going to move on to blended families. And again, the term blended makes things sound like everything's just all smooth. Oh, these new families get together and it's just all perfect. When in reality, we know that it's often more like a bumper car race. We're bumping in, there's conflict, and there's constant adaptability as these 2 families now have to merge and figure out how to do life together. Some people have called it or used the example of a railway station where you now have not only just one family, but you have up to 4 families, and people are getting on and off at the train station, moving all over, and there's this immense complexity in how they do things and how they work. Another area that I think really affects blended families is that the previous marriage can have a strong effect on the next marriage if there's not proper grieving or healing that accompanies the divorce. Okay? And so one of the articles I read this week talked about a man who was getting ready for his son or daughter's birthday party, and his wife noticed that he was just really kind of sullen and almost went into this depressive state, and the wife realized that this husband hadn't totally grieved that past relationship, and so he still had these expectations of what he thought family life should look like. He still had these dreams and goals for what he thought his kid's birthday would be like, and she realized that he was still grieving that previous relationship. I read another article too that talked about, this was not necessarily a divorce, I think it was from a widow, but the fact that these 2 people had been widowed and they came together, but one of them had not grieved and healed through the process long enough, and this spouse felt that he or she was constantly living in the shadow of the wife or the husband that had been before. And they were just like, I can't live like that. How is the relationship equal and balanced when I'm constantly living in the shadow of this person that they once loved? and they said, I can remember this person and honor him or her for who she was, but I can't live in that shadow of that person. Now again, there's obviously complexity in new family dynamics. And so new families, again, have to create a new identity. What was isn't anymore, and now they have, again, sometimes up to 4 families that need to come together to create this new identity. And so it's important that these families go through and create new traditions for themselves, that they work together to understand each other's differences. Sometimes people come into these new families with some real unrealistic expectations. Me and my stepkids are gonna get along just great from day one. And that's not the reality. This new family is just going to be just smooth sailing. We're going to go do this, and we're going to go do this, and we're going to go do this. Only to find out that the children say, you know what, you're not my mom, you're not my dad. I don't want to do that. That's not what we did in our old family. And so there's immense complexity when it comes to blended families. And again, not an easy task. And so, folks, again, I would continue to say that the church has not always responded well to people that have been divorced or that are single parents or that even have blended families. And we need to respond in a much better way. So I invite you to remember our biblical lenses that we have looked through: covenant, grace, empowerment, and intimacy. And here's how I would suggest we move forward as a church in our stance on divorce. Scripture makes it pretty clear that divorce is not God's intention for couples. And so I think that needs to be our expectation, that divorce needs to be only a very last option for couples. But as a church, we need to be walking through and supporting these couples that are struggling to make sure that that divorce isn't necessarily their reality. Okay? Now, there are a couple of issues which I think even Jesus would agree with, that anytime there is abuse or infidelity, that those are probably good grounds for divorce. Okay? Pretty sure Jesus wouldn't call us to live within an abusive home just for the sake of clinging on to that marriage. Right? Now, in both of these issues, as difficult as they are, both abuse and infidelity, do I believe that there can be healing through that? Yes, I do. Do I believe God can restore those marriages? Yes, I do. But, especially in the first case and probably even in the second, there probably needs to be a period of separation for the couple, and they need to seek some professional counseling and care to work through that. Okay? So, again, I want to make sure that people don't think that I'm just being insensitive, because, again, abuse and infidelity are some of the most hurtful things that ever happen. I would also encourage us to look at Jesus' response, because, again, while Jesus takes this very strong stance against divorce in Matthew and in Mark, I would also consider this story about the woman at the well that we see in John 4, and this Samaritan woman who comes out and has been married 4 or 5 times and is currently living with a man that is not her husband. Does Jesus just cast her off and say, you know what, I want nothing to do with you. You're not a part of my family. You're not going to be a part of my church because you've been divorced that many times. He says, no, you know what? I am the water of life, and whoever drinks of me will never thirst again. And he invites her in and says, you know what? You need to heal. You need to make this right. But go and know that you are loved. And I think that that needs to be the church's response. That again, we don't condone divorce except in extreme situations, but also that we love each other through the process. Right? I hope that's coming off clear to you guys. And so we need to support our people and our friends. So some action steps for you today. I would continue to ask those of you in relationships to pray and reflect about the state of your marriage and family. Are you treating your spouse and family the way God instructs and has designed? If you're struggling in your marriage or relationship, I really want to encourage you to seek out help. Okay? Oftentimes, we don't like to air our dirty laundry to people. We don't want people to know that we're struggling or we're having issues, and yet we can't help unless you come forward. Finally, I would ask the church to pray for married couples and families, and to really come alongside those couples or those parents that may be struggling. You know, when we did our Love and Respect conference, they talked about a young woman who took the Love and Respect material and she went to 300 couples that were struggling in their marriage, and out of those 300, 297 were able to resolve the conflict and stay together in their marriage. All right. Now that's just one tool in a very vast arsenal of resources that we have available today. But what I want you to see is the power of coming alongside our families, because oftentimes when we get into fights, sometimes we don't know what's going on. Sometimes we need an extra set of eyes to say, well, have you ever considered it this way? Have you ever thought about it from this point? And so the first week of this series, I offered if people wanted to step up into leadership, and some of the ways that you can step up into leadership is one, by praying for our couples and our families. But we also could use, especially some of you that have long-lasting marriages, you would be excellent mentors for some of our young couples. And what a great opportunity that would be for us to learn from your experiences and some of the things that you have done along the way. But anyway, even if you're not married, coming alongside someone who may be struggling in that time of need would be a very valuable resource for them. So as we have